Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, talking baseball, our good friend New York Dore. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities and a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. Thanks also to our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news today presented by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt and Indiana State set to play Tuesday night, Hawkins Field, 6:30. Indiana State, really good team from the Missouri Valley Conference. That's one that if Vanderbilt can get the win on Tuesday, could have some positive RPI impact for the Commodores in terms of seeding and such down the road. So that's one to watch. Our guest today, New York Dore. We will talk some baseball. Our guest line is sponsored by Vanderbilt Fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? What about life or commercial insurance? Josh can help you with all those things. Call him at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton. He's my insurance agent. Hope you'll make him yours. Before I get to our buddy New York Dore, one correction. In yesterday's podcast, we talked with Chip Frederick about some pinch hitting decisions late. I talked about pinch hitting for Stephen Scott. I had forgotten Scott was already removed from the game at that point, as a listener on Twitter pointed out, so I apologize for that error. That game, New York Dore, was really getting tough to follow, period, and especially if you're a writer writing a couple of game stories. That Sunday game was, I think, one for the ages, maybe not in the way that Vanderbilt fans wanted, but it was certainly entertaining.
Yeah, it was a bit of a bizarre game, and if you follow me on Twitter, you'll have seen two things. I was all over the late game substitutions and, critical of Corbs. Corbs is the best coach in America. Wouldn't have anyone but him. But at the same time, we have the freedom, and he's very well compensated for constructive criticism, and for that matter, for non-constructive criticism. And it doesn't mean we appreciate him any less, but I think he screwed the pooch with some of his late inning decisions, which I'll get to in a second. And then with respect to the game as a whole, I put out the particular stats that I still find just remarkable, and which I think absolve anyone who says that game was a disaster. I think it was just baseball, and sometimes the bounces don't go your way. I do not think Arkansas hit the ball harder than we did. I think they just hit it where it isn't. And if you look at the statistics, you and I talked a lot about BABIP, which is, Chris, why don't you sort of describe what BABIP is?
Batting average on balls in play is the percentage of balls that are in the field of play that go for hits. And here's what that means. A ball that is a home run is not in the field of play. And obviously, if you strike out or walk, you're not putting a ball in the field of play. So what you look at is the number of balls that are put in the field where a fielder can make a play and how many of those turn into outs. And that number for Vanderbilt, usually around 350 most years, maybe 340. Other teams hit around maybe 310, 320 because Vanderbilt's better defensively at turning balls into play than into outs than its opponents. Also usually better at not giving up hard contact. There's a lot of things that factor into BABIP, but one of the things is the notion that a lot of times you don't really control. I mean, you have some control over where you hit the ball, but a ball hit right to the shortstop or a ball hit a few feet to his left where it's just out of the reach of his fingertips. There's really not a lot of skill involved in that. There are some things involved within that, like if you hit the ball hard, it's more likely to fall for a hit, but those sort of things. But it's the just baseball element that if you intuitively watch baseball for years, you know what that is. And so BABIP is a measure of how often a ball hit in the field of play falls in for a hit. And I think I wrote about this. I think Arkansas hit I don't know, six something on balls and plays. Or no, I think that's what Patrick Raby's given up the last 2 weeks. But that Sunday game was right
That
up
is
there
bonkers.
too.
Raby's
Yeah,
number is around 600. That's remarkable for a guy.
yeah.
Who's given
It's
up
680 the last 2 starts, I think.
That's
So
remarkable for a guy who's given up a grand total of, I think it's now either 3 or 4 extra base hits all season, 2 or 3 of which came on Sunday. But so if we look at breaking down the BABIP, and I don't know if sac flies are calculated into BABIP. I think they're excluded.
I think they are because they're in the field of play. Yeah.
They are well, one way or another. Both teams had 1 sac fly. So let's break it down. Vanderbilt had 4 home runs excluded. Arkansas had 1 home run excluded. Vanderbilt had 9 strikeouts excluded. Arkansas had 7 strikeouts excluded. Vanderbilt received 13 free passes. That's 11 walks and 2 hit by batsmen and hit 1 sac fly. Arkansas received 6 free passes and a sac fly. And I'll actually note that it was a tight strike zone, so 6 walks there is not that bad from Vanderbilt's pitching, particularly given the success Arkansas had in putting the ball in the field of play. So Vanderbilt had a pretty routine and average 333 BABIP. You'd expect with all of those numbers you'd win. You'd expect to win if you score more than 10 runs. Arkansas had a BABIP of 21 of 39 for 538.
That just doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. And again, we weren't talking about every ball being lined into the gap. There were a lot of little flares, dinky shots. This was not don't get me wrong. Arkansas squared up the ball a decent amount, but 538 is a little ridiculous. But so I chalk up that loss to it's baseball. Weird things happen. As Justin Willis says to DeMarco, do something weird, and he goes around and hits him inside the Parker, or a little league inside the Parker, I should say. But weird things happen in baseball. But there are certain things you can control, and those are playing the percentages. And I think my honest opinion is Corpse did not have the best 8th and 9th innings. So you and I have discussed previously, I think he's a little freewheeling on the defensive substitution, putting Kiambu in for Pat DeMarco, who is not a bad defender. He's a pretty good speed, good jumps, pretty good arm. Is Kiambu a better defender? He very well may be. He's certainly faster. He does not have the bat, and there's been at least one instance earlier in the season where Corpse put Kiambu in as a defensive replacement for Pat, and Pat was up in the first couple batters. In the next inning, we lost the lead, and we lost Pat's bat. And so, that was a little unfortunate. Now, yesterday we were very underhanded in that. Sunday, we were underhanded in that 2-3 starting outfielders were out. Coop and Pat both have leg injuries, is my understanding, and both of them were not in the starting lineup. Coop did end up pinch hitting, but he was not healthy. So you're shorthanded immediately. But going into the 8th inning, Corbs makes the decision to swap out Steven Scott, an experienced senior who plays a much better left field than I think people give him credit for. Doesn't have a cannon of an arm. From left, does have it from the catching spot. So, you at least have some confidence in his throwing ability. But he's a senior. He knows how to play the field. He actually plays the wall pretty darn well. But they put Kiambu in for Steven Scott. Of course, Steven Scott's lineup spot does open up batting 6th or 7th in the next inning. And we do get to him. And at that point, I think Cooper Davis pinch hit for Scotty and struck out to end the game. But, let's look at the moves he didn't make. The man who made the last out in the bottom of the 8th inning was Isaiah Thomas, who is a extraordinarily promising athlete. I mean, like Connor Harrell, but young. And, he's got the bat, he's got the strength, looks like a gliding linebacker, much like Harrell was. I don't know that he has quite as good a speed, but ball gets hit to Isaiah in center field and in slightly right center. In my opinion, I wonder if Kiambu, Pat, or Coop don't make that catch. but certainly don't turn it into a triple, meaning we have the infield in. So no criticism intended to Isaiah. I think he's had a great first week, but of real intense play. But if you're going to put in a defensive replacement, why not put it in for the guy who's played in a grand total of 4 games rather than a senior in left field? Now, needless to say, fast forward a couple batters, and a ball does get hit to Kiambu, and Kiambu boots it. Now, probably the run scores anyway, but it's just sort of if you're the defensive replacement, you can't be making an error. But I come back to something else, which is Corbs repeatedly says that Austin Martin is the best center fielder on the team. And he said that multiple times. So if you're going to do a defensive replacement, why are you not bringing in Jason Gonzalez to play third base, who I think is a better defender at third than Austin Martin, and put Austin in center? If a defensive replacement is just to reward a guy who's been around the program for 4 years, deserves an opportunity to be recognized, that's fine, but do that in a midweek game. And don't remove our key bats from the lineup when we know that our pitching staff, particularly the relief corps, has been up and down. I'm on the internet, and by definition, if you're on the internet, you're obligated to express opinions. Again, Tim Corbin, greatest thing that ever happened to Vanderbilt athletics, knows more in baseball than I know in my pinky fingernail. But he's in a position where his choices will be second guessed. Same with Scott Brown. Same with Mike Baxter. I try not to criticize the kids themselves. You can't avoid that sometimes. I think the wrong decisions were made there, and then it was topped off in the bottom half of the ninth when Arkansas brings in a sidewinding right-hander who we'd seen on Friday and everyone sort of had difficulty with, and he faces Harrison Ray and then Cooper Davis, and you've got Walker Grisanti sitting on the bench, and now Walker. I hesitate to call him a pinch hit specialist because that's probably not really reflective of who he is. He's had success historically as a pinch hitter, with the exception of the second half of last season. But he's a lefty bat, and you've got a sidewinder. And I tweeted out, if they don't pinch hit Grisanti here, I might as well just turn the game off. And I didn't turn the game off, but I might as well have, because it ended up in 2 strikeouts. And Harry didn't have a terrible at bat against him. He fouled off some pitches, but you could see that coming a mile away. See the strikeout coming because it just wasn't a good matchup. And sometimes you got to play the percentage. If you're going to be making 2, 3, 4 moves in the course of 2 innings, if you don't play the percentages on that, I don't know what you're doing.
Let's get to the heart of the matter here. I think what you're really upset about is that they didn't roll out Ro Coleman in the late innings. Is that not what is really underneath all this?
I mean, by definition, Rowe had received 8 years of eligibility.
In all seriousness, it is an interesting conversation because you look over and Jason Gonzalez has hit the ball well. There's going to be a lot of strikeouts, but the payoff for everything else has been really good. He's been one of their most productive hitters this year, in all things considered, which is hard to do. You've got a lot of options there. And it is interesting on top of that, their top 2 center fielders right now are hurt. It does beg a lot of questions. I don't know if there are easy answers either because there's so many options. It does make for a fascinating podcast discussion.
It does, and it also now I want to put out the caveat that Corbs sees training sessions and he identifies people who look like they're locked in, and I think that's why we saw Zeke Thomas get a couple starts this week. He had the big game at MTSU. It's why we've seen Dom Keegan get some spot starts. It's why, early in the season we saw Jahan Malloy get a couple of starts. And it's one of the reasons why we saw Walker get a couple of starts. So Corbs sees this. He has a feel for the heartbeat of the team and who's going well and who's not. We don't have that. So it's easy to second guess when you don't have all the information, especially also on injury situations. That said, if Austin Martin's our best defensive center fielder and both of our center fielders are out and Austin Martin's just okay at third, why not give Jason some more ABs and move Austin to center while Coop and Pat are out? Or why not, split some more time between Harry and Jason and move Austin back to second, where admittedly, he's not a spectacular second baseman. I would note Don't think Harry is either. He's made some great, outstanding, spectacular plays, particularly going to the back and to the left with balls over his head. But both of these guys are outfielders playing in the infield. So why not get Jason Gonzalez's bat back into the lineup, either by shifting, Austin back to second for a few games a week, or by moving Austin to center and giving, another. Can you imagine having to face, Julian Infante and Jason Gonzalez 8-9? That's not fair. Especially now that Julian is looking back like he's in 2016 form or 2017 form.
I will give you a little bit of a counterpoint, and I don't know if I believe it or not. It's just something to discuss. If you were setting up for the end game in Omaha, which is kind of the way that he's played it the last few years, I guess a plausible reason not to move Martin is if you think he's your third baseman, and Austin has struggled at times, and the way to get better is to play more. So I guess if you think he's your third baseman and you think Davis or DeMarco are going to be your center fielders long term, which I think will be the case, they've just got to get both those guys healthy, which I think is dictated, as you and I know, a lot of the late inning substitutions, in particular with Davis, is to get him some rest. I think that might be a valid reason not to move him, even if it makes you better in the short term. Now, second is just the place I don't know what to do with. I think that you mentioned this last podcast. I think it was you talking about Harrison just looks the most comfortable at second. The set of questions, though, that begs, though, is the trade-off from whoever they would put at second worth the bat, which – and let me put it this way. Harrison does not have a bad bat, but by comparison, it's not as good as the rest. Now, Harrison would be probably 6-7 hitter on a lot of teams, but this one, they've just got so many hits. Yeah.
I'm going to take some issue with that because I actually don't think that Harrison is necessarily a worse hitter than anyone else who could fill one of these sort of musical chairs positions we're dealing with. Jason's had a great start to the year. Harrison has had a rough week, but had a pretty good run before that. If I had my druthers, I would rather see Jason's bat in the lineup than Harrison's, but I don't think it's by an extraordinary amount because I think we've seen some small sample success from Jason rather than a more extended period. Now, don't get me wrong. I, again, would rather have Jason's bat in the lineup than Harrison's. I also don't know that there's necessarily a big distinguishing feature between their gloves other than the fact that Jason's a third baseman and has the instincts for third. And my biggest criticism of Harrison and Austin in the infield is that they haven't had the time to develop the instincts. And that goes to your point, which we'll return to in a second, about getting him minutes there, innings there to get comfortable. But, with Harrison, and I think it's instinctual. It's not, it's not things where, and we saw this with Austin at second too, it's the way you react off the bat. It's the way you instinctually know to do things. And Harrison has caught on to a handful of those, like backing up first, being able to move back on a ball behind him. He's had great instincts for that, but he hasn't necessarily had great instincts for anticipation on grounders. And the one that gets me and sort of pull my hair out is the number of balls hit to the left side of the infield where he's not standing on second covering the bag. And we saw that again on Sunday. It hasn't cost us at all yet on a ball where someone's looked to make the short throw and ends up having to make the long throw. Not that I've seen has that cost us, but it's just sort of maddening. And I just want to shake Harry and say, get used to the position a little bit more and get on the bag because you got to be there. But these are instinctual issues that need time to develop. It's not their fault. It's just that Harry's been an outfielder his whole life, and over the last 2 years has been asked to play some infield like this Army knife, which goes to the point that you made introducing this, which is Corbin sees this as well. And he wants to get people reps in game at a position of need. If we think that when the lineup is full, that it's going to look like this, we want to make sure everyone's comfortable where they want to be. At the same time, you might end up not in the best position in the short term because you're playing for the long term. And I think, Chris, maybe that's something we're talking about is when we're fully healthy, what does the lineup look like? Because to me, we're seeing Julian Fonte play like he did in the fall and like he did in February, which is a lot more like 2017 Julian Fonte. And again, he is by far the best defender on the infield. I mean, Ethan Paul is making a play at competing, but Julian saves a ton of outs because he's really good at first base. He's really good at stretching. He knows how to field throws that are not on target. And the beneficiaries of that are guys like Austin and Ethan. Harry Ray has actually been really good at throwing the ball, so we haven't really had any issues with him throwing from second. But Julian saves a lot of outs, and if that's the case, if Cooper is backing in left and Pat is backing in center, JJ's in right, Julian looks like he's no longer a platoon at first. Phil Clark is the everyday catcher. What does that mean? How do you get Steven Scott and Ethan Paul obviously is at shortstop, because if Ethan Paul were not at short, we'd be in a whole world of hurt. There's no one there to take his spot. All of those, assuming all of those spots are filled, you've got Austin Martin, Harry Ray, Jason Gonzalez, Ty Duvall, and Steven Scott. Austin Martin and Steven Scott have to be in the lineup. So, then you're dealing with three other individuals, and how do you make it work?
Well, okay, we've got about 8 minutes left, and I want to hit this. I also want to hit some pitching, so I want to speed this along. And I want to circle back to something at third, too. But let's say, tell me if you disagree with this. I think when everybody's healthy, you go Clark at catcher, Infante at first, Paul at short. You probably go Davis left, DeMarco center, Blade right, and Scott at DH. Would you have an issue with any of that? And I've left out second and third because I want to get to those next. But I figure if we can agree on that, then that cuts down the time we talk about everything else.
Yeah, so I think the one wild card is that Steven Scott took reps at second in the fall. We've not seen him there, to my recollection, even for a half inning this year. But I think they were anticipating the need to be able to move him around to try and get his bat into the lineup. Assuming I would agree with you that I think that those 8 spots in the lineup or 7 spots in the lineup are set. With obviously the pitcher is not in the discussion, and that we're talking about how do you set up second and third, and is it just Harrison Ray and Austin Martin, or are you trying to get guys like Jason Gonzalez into the lineup? Or are you trying to get guys like Ty Duvall into the lineup?
Yeah, and Duvall may end up being the odd man out here. I had forgotten that Scott had played some second. I don't know that I would necessarily do that. Really, the question is...
I don't think he's ever played it in a game. I think he played it in reps in the fall.
Yeah, I think you just probably stick him at DH and be thrilled that that you have that bat there. So really that begs the question at second and third. And again, I'm not saying that they're doing the wrong thing. I do think that Harrison Ray has pretty good defensive instincts. There are some tools there with the bat, but you said you didn't think that, if I understood you correctly, there was that much difference in the hitting. Well, there is. Slash lines, if you compare Ray to Gonzalez, what is it, 268, 331, 361 for Ray, 365, 484, 462 for Gonzalez. I mean, Gonzalez is probably right now at least twice the offensive player that he is.
I caveat that, again, Gonzalez has seen a much smaller sample size, and that is a fair point. Yeah, and it's also informed by performance last year. I've been probably as bullish on Jason as anyone on the team as far as year-over-year improvement, largely because we didn't see Coop basically at all last year. But I think that the two people who impressed me the most in their improvement year-over-year were Jason's approach at the plate and Phil Clark's approach defensively. I think were the two people who really, really look just remarkably better. That said, I caution that I don't know that we've necessarily seen enough of Julian to say he's a 350 hitter. And I will be honest, I don't think he's a 350 hitter. I think he's a 280 to 300 hitter who can put up 20 home runs next year possibly, or make a run at it. But that said, I don't think he's going to compete with Austin Martin for a team batting title. I just don't think that's the hitter that he is. I think he's a hitter who's going to strike out too much to do that. But again, that's okay because the dynamic that he brings to the game is a specific set. And again, I would rather have him. I think he, of the three, is probably the best defensive option at third. And obviously he's not the hitter that Austin is because no one is. Probably not even Blade. But, I do think I would rather have Jason's bat in the lineup than Harrison's. So, you sort of get into this weird scenario that is Harrison that much better at second than Austin is to offset the fact that Jason's probably the best defender at third and probably the second best bat. You have this weird scenario that, Austin breaks out in hives when he's at second base, so therefore Jason can't play third. I mean, it's a little bizarre.
I want to get to one more thing, and then I think you've just got 3 or 4 minutes left. We need to talk pitching. It is funny. I think with Infante hitting the way that he is, he and Gonzalez are almost really close to being the same hitter. They're going to strike out a lot. Now, I think Gonzalez consistently hits the ball harder on the ones that aren't home runs, and Julian's hitting more of those right now. But it is really similar how much those guys have improved on their weaknesses and how similar they are as hitters. And by the way, they're both right-handers, which begs another thing. When we're talking through all these parts at second and third, these guys are all right-handers, which makes it a little bit tougher to mix and match with platoon options.
Yeah, it does. And the one thing I will note that, and we've got 5-6 bats in the lineup that are lefty. The one thing to note is all of our lefty bats, for the most part, have hit the best lefties we've faced pretty well, and that's Dexakis, Lacey, Cronin this weekend, the Crochet from Tennessee. They've done really well against left-handed, elite left-handed pitchers, so it's been fun to watch. But one other thing I will note, just with the idea of Coop and DeMarco being out, the two people who were in the lineup because Coop and DeMarco out were Zeke Thomas and Ty Duvall on Sunday, and they were the only two people who didn't rack up numbers. I don't mean to pick on them, and just almost go to the point that we weren't full strength this past weekend, and weren't full strength on Sunday, and unfortunately that came back to bite us.
Okay, I know you've got to run any minute. I'm going to give you the floor to talk any pitching issues you'd like, whether that's bullpen or whether that's what to do with that other starting spot in the weekend rotation.
Yeah, I don't think we make a change just yet. I think Pat Raby has done enough in his career, and a BABIP of 620, that's not all his fault. It is the one thing that really grinds my gears, and you can imagine the Family Guy grinds my gears animated GIF popping up on that is the number of times we call, particularly with Pat on the mound, for really non-competitive waste pitches. And I would just love to see us be a little more aggressive and then try and get Pat deeper into games by focusing on inducing soft contact. This is, again, a guy who's given up 3 or 4 extra bases all season. And where he gets into trouble is he gets 2 strikes and then he starts to nibble. So, listen, I don't know enough. I don't know nearly as much as Brownie on pitching and pitching strategy and game calling strategy. But what I do know is, a pitch 2 feet over a batter's head is not a competitive pitch. And, we go to an 0-2 count with Pat. One of the most frustrating things to me is seeing Phil Clark get up off his knees and standing basically full freight, waiting for a waste pitch up to try and change the strike zone. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked in 3 years. Just throw to contact, put the ball in play. yeah, we might end up with a game like we did on Sunday where Arkansas gets 22 hits, but that's not the norm. That's the outlier. We've got a great defense. We've got a fast surface, which with true hops. Just let the ball play. No more nibbling. Just go after guys, and if you get hit, we get hit. So be it. But it'll be a better product on the field, and it'll be more competitive and really get to the lighting a fire under the team, I think.
No, I think you're totally right on that. Pat, with really the exception of some bad games last year, Auburn's one that comes to mind, he just has not been hit hard over the course of his career. His troubles come in pitch volume and, like you said, nibbling around the edges. I think if you just unleash him, maybe let him dictate what pitches he throws and let him go after hitters, I think Pat Raby, more likely than not, will be okay. The more I think about it, the batting average on ball in his play, think, no, he's not looked good, but that's made it worse. I mean, when you're giving up 681 over 2 games, he could pitch 20 more times, and that might not happen in one game, let alone 2. I think you're right with that.
Yeah, I think it's, and also, the biggest issue on hitting is the count you're in, and you're on defense on 0-2, you're on defense on 1-2, but when it becomes 2-2, 3-2, or 3-1 or 2-1, it changes the dynamic. Go after the guys when they're on their heels. Don't waste pitches. Don't nibble. I don't need a called third strike. I don't need a third strike. I'll take a 4-3. Just, don't extend these games unnecessarily. From a fan perspective, it makes it a far less enjoyable experience. I would take the wins over the fan experience every single time, but I don't think it's a winning strategy to throw non-competitive waste pitches. And I think we do that way too much, particularly with Patrick. And I think that, changing the direction. And to be honest, we saw this with David Price as a sophomore. With David Price as a sophomore, there was a lot more nibbling and there was a lot more extending the ABs. And it's one of the reasons why the best pitcher in Vanderbilt history as a sophomore was maxing out at 6 innings. And it's because he didn't throw aggressively to contact. As a junior, he was maxing out at nine innings and potential for more. Because he was getting those 1, 2, 3 pitch outs, because he was getting a lot of 3-pitch strikeouts, because there wasn't a waste. Now, obviously, it's easy to say that when you've got 96 mile an hour heat and a slider like Price did, but at the same time, from a strategy perspective, it's all the same. And I really do think that, the waste pitches in particular are a disservice to the type of pitcher that Pat can be. And he can be a pitcher that's success doing it anyway. This is a guy who has, 22, 23 wins in his career, maybe even more than that. This is a highly successful pitcher, and I just think we need to do better to get him to focus on inducing contact and not fearing the bat. Now, it's hard to say that when you're coming off a BABIP like that over back-to-back games, but I think it's what has to be done.
Yeah, final thoughts. I looked up Raby's numbers. Heading into his Sunday start, he had a career 288 ERA, was 27-11. Obviously, that took a little bit of a hit. And plus, you don't have a midweek game next week. You got Indiana State today. We're doing this Tuesday morning. That's a really tough opponent. Hickman sets up nicely for that. You give Raby the opportunity at Alabama to either maybe get it right, which I think he's earned, and if for some reason you don't and it's a third straight bad start, then you have that next week to kind of switch things around. But New York Dore, I know you're in a rush to go. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to catching you next week.
Indeed. Thanks, Chris.
All right, he's